guys, so good to have you here with us. I thought we'd jump in. There's a lot to cover today, and I want us to give it an opportunity for us to lean in and have some questions and discuss, because every situation is unique, you know. So we all know that leadership is not for the faint of heart, right? You guys agree with that? That leadership sometimes demands us, as I said yesterday at morning session, that one thing that we kind of cultivate in our leaders all the time is just the ability to, leaders have to be willing to run toward difficult conversations when everyone else is running away. We always talk about wanting to make disciples, but oftentimes discipleship happens not just in declarative classroom settings or one-on-one mentor settings. Sometimes deep, life-changing discipleship happens in the context of a difficult conversation with someone. And so if that's true, then that means that not only do we need to be inspired to have difficult conversations, we need to know how to have them. We need to be educated, we need to grow in our ability to have them. Not only so that we can do that, but if we're going to continue to make disciples, we have to train and raise up people that know how to have difficult conversations themselves. It's not just simply a tool for us, it's a tool for those that we're leading and training ourselves. I want to start with a quick story real quick. So about a year ago, we had brought someone new onto our team, and man, they were a rock star. They were so gifted, productive. They were checking every box. They were very, very proactive. You didn't have to ask them to do stuff. They just were on top of things all the time. But I noticed that there was a slight change. There was a slight change. It's okay.
Dealing with difficult subjects.
I understand. Enjoy that conversation.
Yeah.
Right there. It's good. But what I noticed after we brought the teammate onto the staff person on the team, that there was a slight dynamic change with our staff. Collaboration fell to some degree with the team. It was just like a slow fade in the area of teamwork and coming together. Collaboration was lower. There was just kind of some underlying tension. And I remember walking out of a staff meeting, and one of my associates that I've been working with for a long, long time, and he says, "Are we going to do something about this?" I said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Have you noticed?" And he began to kind of bring some things to light that I had just not seen, dynamic that I had not seen. And it meant, and I had to make a decision. I had to make a decision in that moment. Come on, you're good, you're good. I had to make a decision. Am I going to just kind of sit and let this simmer? Or am I going to step up and step into a difficult conversation and deal with it? And all of us oftentimes are in that place where we're going to have to make a decision. Am I going to lean into this conversation? And we're going to have the conversation that needs to be had. Am I just going to sit back on my frustrations and just and not deal with it, or am I going to lean in? So what I want you walking away with today is the ability to have a last 10% conversation. What do I mean by that? Most people can share what they think and feel about 90% of what they think and feel. But they oftentimes reserve the last 10% and they keep that to themselves. Why? The answer is oftentimes they're worried about how it's going to be received. They're worried about hurting someone, or wounding someone. They're worried about emotional fallout from the situation. Will they leave? Will they bail? You know. So oftentimes we end up only going to sharing that 90%. But leaders have to be willing to have last 10% conversations. Because that's where the gold is. That's where the gold is. That's where breakthrough oftentimes happens, is in that last 10%. It might be the most difficult last 10% to mine, dig out of someone's heart. But oftentimes, come on in. Oftentimes, that's where the gold is found. That's where breakthrough happens. That's where great, deeper discipleship happens. That's where breakthrough happens from a team dynamic. Hearts get connected. Relational breakthrough happens. So it's crucial that we be able to come to a place of having last 10% conversations. So this is a part of not only the language of our team, our staff, but also the language of our region. I'm a regional president across the Houston area, and we talk about this all the time. And I think whatever the language you use, you need to have language for it. Hey, it's time for a last 10% conversation. When I sell that to a staff member, they know what I'm talking about. They know that we've got to have a kind of a sit-down conversation to talk through what's going on. Or if they are dealing with a situation that they're asking input for, I sometimes tell them, hey, it's time for a last 10%. We need to have a sit-down with them and have a conversation about what's going on. So what I want to do is kind of give you kind of a biblical perspective on why these conversations matter, and that we actually see that in Scripture. I want to talk about some common fears that we have just as average people when it comes to having difficult conversations with others, and what sometimes keeps us silent as leaders from leaning into them. And then I want to talk about how you can help kind of craft a conversation as you get ready to sit down with somebody about what it might look like. So this conversation matters because we all would agree upon that conflict in ministry is not optional. We all agree with that. Conflict in ministry is not optional. It's inevitable. It's going to happen. It's not when. It's not if. It's when. It's going to happen. And if that's true, you maybe up to this point, based on your role on the team, you've always thought it's other people that have to have those conversations. Maybe you're a team member in a support role, and you always think someone above you is the one that needs to go talk to them. And so you've always gone and taken the issues to them, and you go, hey, you need to go talk to so-and-so, you know? But oftentimes, man, we're going to be so much more effective as leaders if we know how to have those conversations. We're going to take some burden and load lifting off of our leaders, and we can do that ourselves as well. It's so crucial that we as leaders come to the place of verbalizing rather than internalizing. Verbalizing rather than internalizing. What do I mean by internalizing? By internalizing, I mean this part of us that tends to hold things inside and keep things to ourselves. And sometimes we feel certain things or we think certain things. We find ourselves frustrated and annoyed with people. We find ourselves kind of hitting a lid in how our interaction with them. We don't know what else to do. And a lot of times we end up internalizing all these emotions. And internalizing all those emotions doesn't help anybody. You've got to move to a place of being able to verbalize appropriately what's needed versus internalizing. Have you ever had someone that didn't share with you something that was important that you wish they would have said out loud to you? Man, I wish you would have told me. I remember there was a guy, one of the deacons in our church years ago, when I first lead pastor. I was a very young senior pastor. And we would do this thing where on a regular basis, some of our leadership team, lay leaders in the church, we bring them in just to check on them, have a one-on-one meeting to hang out with them. And I was meeting with this deacon and his wife, and one of the questions I would always ask, hey, how are you and I? How is our relationship? He goes, I'm glad you asked. You know, I was like, oh my gosh, what's happening? And he began to share that that he had been hurt and angry with me for the last year because he said I ignored him one Sunday morning in the lobby of the church. And of course I said, tell me again what happened and when was this? He said, it was about a year ago. It was about a year ago. You walked right by me and I said hello to you. You ignored me. And you could tell he was grieved. He was kind of angry. And I asked him, his name was Tony. I said, Tony, why didn't you ever say anything? He carried this for a year. And you could just tell he was just kind of carrying it, right? And it was because he chose to internalize rather than verbalize. So Paul talks about this idea of the importance of guarding unity within the church. Listen to Ephesians chapter 4, verse 1. It says, I therefore, a prisoner for the Lord, urge you to walk in a manner worthy of the calling, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing with one another in love. Listen to this last line. Eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. Eager to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. So what does that mean? That means unity is something that's maintained. It's kept, meaning it's not passive. You have to proactively protect it. So as leaders, we've got to kind of sit at the edge of our seat on the ready, not only just as lead leaders or lead pastors, but team members, those in leadership, need to be sitting at the edge of their seat, proactively guarding the unity of the church. Eager, he says. So it's not passive. I'm not talking about kind of a romantic version of unity where we're all sitting around a fire on the beach and we're singing Kumbaya or whatever the song would be here in Africa. We would sing together in closing. But I'm talking, you get where I'm going, that we're talking about a proactive desire and an expectation. I expect every leader within our church to guard the unity of the church. That you have an active role in guarding the unity of the church. And that means one of the ways that we proactively guard the unity of the church is running toward difficult conversations that others might be avoiding. Because it's those hidden, unspoken, internalized things that people are carrying around that are often seeds for disunity within the leadership team, within the church, and oftentimes end up being the lids to the capacity of our leadership team and our church being able to flourish. I would caution you real quickly on this idea of disunity. Just because someone has a different idea doesn't mean they're being divisive, right? Just because people think differently or they have just a different idea about how we ought to do what we're doing doesn't mean that's divisive. So be careful that you don't go on a power trip and you serve, that's spiritually abusive to call something divisive when they just have a different opinion. So that's crucial to remember. Jesus modeled this idea of proactive having of difficult conversations. Everybody's familiar with Matthew chapter 18, where Jesus gives instructions that if someone has sinned against you, what are you to do? Go to him. Go to him. And if he doesn't listen, you're supposed to take one or two others with you. If they don't listen, if you go into them with one or two, they don't listen, then you take it to the church, which I always see as like the nuclear option, right? So what's the reason? Somebody tell me, what's the reason we're supposed to go one-on-one with them? What'd you say? What's the reason? Jesus says go one-on-one with them.
To avoid gossip.
Yeah, exactly. What'd you say? Say it a little louder.
To avoid gossip.
To avoid gossip. And the reason that happens is not just passing it on to somebody else. It's actually even deeper than just gossip. It's that oftentimes we end up causing more offense as we share it with someone else. You see what I'm saying? We end up causing offense because think about this, like just regular human nature takes place when, let's say that you and I are friends, and I come to you and I say, hey, I'm really frustrated with Randy, Pastor Randy, and he should have done this, whatever. And so let's say that he's my friend, and we are friends. It's not hypothetical, we are friends. But a natural reaction by a friend, oftentimes people equate loyalty, they equate being a friend and being loyal is I need to be upset at the same person you're upset with.
Yeah.
That's just a natural reaction. We end up picking up the offense because we feel like that's what a good friend does. Instead of me being frustrated, he's like, man, yeah, we bullshit, man. I can't believe he did that to you, right?
Yeah.
So this is not just wise leadership. This is divine brilliance of understanding that he knows how we're wired, that our natural proclivity is to oftentimes pick up the offense of an individual. So the first call for us that when I have an issue with a person is not to go to my small group or to another staff member or to my prayer group. It's to go to the person that I have that I've got sin with. That's crucial point. Recently I had to deal with a situation with our staff. I've got a pretty diverse makeup of a staff on our team. I've got some that are very experienced, that are older, and I've got some that we're investing in that are younger on the younger end. And this is actually real time. Just a couple months ago, I had to deal with a serious situation on our staff where it all came down to two of our younger staff members having issue one with another, and they did not deal with it with one another. They ended up going to other people, and offense, this very thing that we're talking about, got picked up, and all of a sudden lines were drawn. It became an us versus them, very toxic. And of course, as soon as it came out, I had to go deal with it and bring them in a room, and we had to have a last 1% conversation with them and tell them, hey, you've not guarded the unity, you're not practicing the very values that we hold as a team. But all of that took place. All of that took place because they were not willing to go to the one person that could actually make a difference. Does that make sense? We oftentimes go to people that have no ability to change the situation. We go to everyone else except the person that we need to talk to. And so we've got to be willing to step in and lean into the conversation that matters. That means stepping up to a different conversation with others. Offense, we talked about it last night. Pastor Darrell talked about dropping the rock. All that type of picking up rocks, all that happens in the dark. When we bring the situation that's causing a hard situation in our life, When we bring it out to the light, that's where it gets exposed. We can give attention to it, we can address it. But when we hide it, either with ourselves or with others, and we never bring it out to light with individuals that actually can make a difference, that's where this bitterness and the malice rose. Here's how you know, here's a few ways that you know you might be dealing with bitterness with somebody within the church, with somebody on your team, maybe even your leader. Here's how you know you might be harboring bitterness. How about this one? When you go out of your way to avoid them. When you go out of your way to avoid them. When you're ducking down, you see them coming down the hallway, and you're like, oh, I'm going to go around the coffee shop this way, right? I'm going to avoid having to see them. You see them coming, you lean into a conversation you're not even in just to avoid having to make eye contact with them and begin to talk to them. You guys are laughing because we've all done it, okay? Another way that you know you have an issue with a person is that you begin to find yourself rehearsing what you would want to tell them. Like you rehearse arguments. Anybody ever rehearse an argument with yourself? Okay? I do it all the time in my car, when I'm on a commute, in the shower. Of all things, in the shower, what am I doing, all right? And oftentimes what's happening is we're rehearsing what we'd like to say to them, but we never actually say it. We never actually have the conversations that are needed. Another way that you know you have an issue with an individual is that when you interpret and filter everything they say and do through a negative lens. That even if what they're doing is innocuous, there's no guile in it, it's sinless, and there's no real issue, but we see everything they say and do through a negative bent. And what we're experiencing, it's almost like if you've ever looked through a lens that's distorted, that's bent, we're actually seeing them through the broken filter of bitterness. We're seeing them through the eyes of malice, where we can only see what either how they've wounded us or how they've hurt us and how we view them. And so even how we see and hear them is damaged. That note shows us that something's going on. Paul says, Ephesians chapter 4, verse 26, he says, be angry and do not sin. Do not let the sun go down on your anger, and give no opportunity for the devil. And this is where I just want to be super aggressive and kind of grab you by the shirt for a second and says, you need to be ruthless about dealing with these situations that you've been putting off. And by ruthless, I don't mean violent. I'm just trying to tell you that you cannot put some of these things off. You cannot put them off. Come on in. I see you looking. Come on in. You need to come in. We're good. Yeah. It's really important that you be in a place where you're ruthless about dealing with situations rather than putting them off and acting like, well, I don't need to deal with it. Here's some reasons why we do avoid it. And we would say this other thing too as well, is that you got to be remembered that the enemy uses this as a tactic. The last chapter of Ephesians that talks about putting on the armor of God talks about the reason we have to put on the armor of God is because of the schemes of the devil. This is in the playbook. This is so turnkey. He does it all the time. I mean, think about this. How often in a conference or in a setting, I have to preach on in my church forgiveness probably 3 or 4 times every year. And every time I do a thing on forgiveness and dropping the rock, something like that, every time the altars are full. And the reason that happens is because the enemy loves to use this as a foothold in everyone's life, all the time, 24/7. This is one of his go-to plays. And so you've got to remember that and be on the lookout and aggressive, not just in the lives of other people that you're loving and ministering to, discipling. You've got to be looking at that in your own life, okay? Don't let the enemy have a foothold. Deal with things. The whole passage in Ephesians chapter 4, Paul says, deal with things quickly. Don't let the enemy get a foothold. Don't think you're somehow above his schemes, okay? So we've got to kind of be, again, at the edge of our seat, being aggressive to guard the unity of spirit within the body. Why do we as leaders avoid difficult conversations? What's the reasoning? What do we tell ourselves? I think, first of all, the number one reason is fear. We're afraid of being misunderstood. They're not going to understand where I'm coming from. They're going to think I'm on a power trip. They're going to take it the wrong way. Maybe we're afraid of the emotional fallout. That what are they going to tell other people? We're afraid of being the bad guy or bad girl. Bad girl sounds weird. What's the girl version of that? I don't know. Just move on. Okay, yeah. Maybe it's Mean Girl. Maybe that's the better way.
Look at that.
And here's the deal, it's true, all of us as leaders, we want to be liked. We want to be liked. We want to be the cool leader, the cool pastor, we want to be we want to be loved and liked by everybody. And that's a common trait for a lot of people that go into ministry or that serve in ministry. They want to be liked by others. They want everybody to love them, be grateful for them, appreciate them. And so sometimes we're afraid that if I sit down and actually say what needs to be said, what if they no longer see me that way? And I would just lovingly, gently point this out to you, really, that choice is unloving. It's unloving. The most loving thing you can do as a leader at times is to say the hard thing. When you're thinking that, oh, okay, I don't want to say this because I don't want to hurt them, I think I mentioned this yesterday, that oftentimes we're telling ourselves, I don't want to hurt them, when really the issue is really not about them, is we want to preserve our image in their eyes, that we want to be liked by them. Does that make sense? So it's important to understand and realize that it's important to realize that you've got to be willing sometimes to say some things that might change the way they see you as a leader, because you feel like it's important enough. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is say the hard thing. We rationalize the way we avoid it. We tell ourselves, well, maybe it's not that big of a deal. Maybe I'm making a mountain out of a molehill. You know, this isn't that big of a deal. Maybe I'm just being overly whatever, fill in the blank, all right? Sometimes we tell ourselves we can rationalize not having a hard conversation. Maybe we tell ourselves, well, they're probably just stressed out. They're probably going through something, even though they've been doing it for the last 2 years. But we're telling ourselves it's just because they're having a hard time. Oh, this next one is one I've used that I've leaned on for years, and sometimes in avoiding difficult conversation was, you know, they'll come around. They'll make the turn. I can get them there. You know. How about this one? I need to wait for a better time. But have you ever noticed the better time never shows up when you actually have the conversation? Right? I'll wait for a better time. Andy Stanley says this. He says, never let the situation mean more than the relationship. Never let the situation mean more than the relationship. So what does that mean? It means that I'm never going to allow the situation we're dealing with to become bigger than holding on and clinging to making the relationship work. It's the fighting for reconciliation, especially when it comes to things that are just areas of preference, right? We're not talking about, most issues within the church aren't theological in nature. They're almost always just people problems, personality issues, preferences, things like that. And I think when Andy says that, when he talks about never let the situation mean more than the relationship, it's basically, he's pointing out to this idea that conflict is inevitable, but disconnection is optional. Have you ever, I don't know, I'm speaking from like a U.S. culture standpoint, like right now, I'm noticing that people will write off relationships and cut people off like at the drop of the hat. Like they'll walk out of a relationship, they'll cut family members off easily, just cut them off. Oftentimes because they think that's easier than actually having to deal with the emotions they're navigating, having those difficult conversations. As a leader, it's crucial that you know how to have difficult conversations, because the longer you put that difficult conversation off, the rest of the team oftentimes is looking at you going, when are you going to deal with this? We lose credibility as leaders when our team members are looking at us going, why? Is somebody going to do something? Is somebody going to say something? Because I see what this person's doing. I see how they're making things harder for our team. I see how they're damaging the relational dynamic of what it is to work, and they put more work on us, and the leader's not doing anything just because the leader doesn't want to step up. So when you aren't willing to step up and have difficult conversations, you lose credibility as a leader, right? So it's crucial to realize that's on me, that's my responsibility, and my team is watching me. Now, years ago, when we first started talking about this idea of the last 10% conversations, my very first church I was pastoring, I found myself having to create a culture of people being comfortable about having conversations. And so we took this church that had a lot of underlying currents of dysfunction. We took them from people that wouldn't talk to each other, wouldn't have difficult conversations. All of a sudden, everybody was having last 10% conversations, right? The problem was they were doing it. They weren't doing it in love, right? They'd show up and went, "Hey, pastor said I got to have the last 10%. I'm going to drop the hammer on you." All right. So what we had to do, I had to reel them all back in, get our leaders back in the room. I said, "Listen, okay, we've got to revisit this. Yes, you need to be having last 10% conversations, but it needs to take place and be had in love. Speak the truth in what? Love. Like without love, we're gonna be hurting. All right. Many of us, when it comes to leadership within our church, we need to remember that if I've got to have, especially as a leader, where I'm having to sometimes bring correction or spiritual discipline, I've got to be reminded that last 10% conversations or corrective conversations are not about being punitive, they're restorative in nature. Restoration is always the goal. Is always the goal. Everybody say restoration. Restoration is always the goal. If you as a leader are just thinking about dropping the hammer on somebody, and you have a kind of maybe some of you grew up in a ministry generation where that was kind of how it was done, we've got to remember that it needs to be done in love. It's always about restoration. How many feel like you have an allergic reaction to conflict? Like you just avoid it? Some honest people in the room, all right? That's pretty much normal. If you like conflict, you know, the diagnosis for that is you're a sociopath, all right? That's the problem, all right? So how I want you, for those of you that maybe honestly say, "Hey, I avoid conflict at all costs. I hit the eject button. I just cannot handle this." I just want to encourage you toward thinking conflict in a little bit of a different way, because we see conflict, we kind of have an allergic reaction to it. There's a guy by the name of David Augsburg. He put this term, or twist of the term that I love. He said, rather than seeing it as conflict or confrontation, he said, I want you to see it as carefrontation. Carefrontation. That we carefront someone in the areas that we're wanting to navigate with them. And all of that to point to this picture, this idea that sometimes the greatest act of love and care on a team or in ministry or someone we're leading and discipling, sometimes the greatest act of love is, of caring for someone, is having the conversation with them. Okay? That talking to them about what's needed. Most of this he talks about most of us default to 5 conflict styles. Right? I'm going to read these out to you, and you can see kind of maybe where you might land. The first way some people deal with conflict is they have a my way mentality, meaning it's my way. I have one goal as we sit down and talk, and it's going to be my way in this situation. Another way that people deal with conflict is a no way, like they just don't have the conversation. That's one of the reasons we're having this workshop, this breakout. Another way that some people deal with conflict is thy way, meaning they allow the other person to simply have their way. They just go, you know what? They back off, whatever you want. They're people pleasers. They let the other person have their way because they don't want to deal with the conflict of it. But the way that we need to be leading to is something called the third way. The third way. And the third way is not my way. It's not your way. It's not no way. It's not even our way. Sometimes people choose to compromise. Okay? Some people think that that's really the best way. If you as a leader are going to someone about a situation that you need to come to a compromise, sometimes compromise is not the way that needs to be done. Right? Sometimes compromise is dysfunctional because maybe that's just flat out wrong. We can't compromise this situation, this expectation, this value within our church, right? So the third way is that I care enough to confront about what needs to be spoken about. I care enough to confront this situation. The third way is not harsh correction. It's not passive tolerance. It's not giving them a pass on things, but it's truth spoken in love. 2 Timothy chapter 2, verse 24 says, the Lord's servant, Paul is mentoring Timothy about kind of how to navigate situations. He says, and the Lord's servant must not be quarrelsome, but kind to everyone, able to teach, patiently enduring evil, correcting his opponents in gentleness. So, gentleness is not weakness. Gentleness is controlled strength, right? If someone doesn't have strength, and if I don't have strength, and I'm dealing with a physical altercation, Just because I don't bring strength because I don't have strength doesn't mean I was gentle. I didn't have strength to bring, right? Gentleness is to be able to have strength but restrain it. I could drop the hammer on somebody, I could spike the ball in their face, but I withhold that. That's what gentleness is. And so gentleness isn't weakness, it's controlled strength, controlled by the Spirit. So confronting someone, if I'm sitting down with somebody, this is what it might sound like as I open the conversation, all right? It might sound like, hey, this isn't easy for me to bring up, but it matters enough for our relationship for us to talk through this. It's not easy to talk about, but it matters enough for us to sit down. Another way that you might start a conversation might be, I value you, and I value our relationship, and that's why I'm choosing to bring this up to you today. Right? You're building it on the value of the relationship. Another way, as a leader, you might say, hey, I want us to be a healthy team, and that often means being honest with one another. There's something I need to be honest with you about. Right? Does that make sense? The idea of just starting there. Another truth is that oftentimes difficult conversations are made up like really layered different relationships. Okay, so I want to talk about the different dynamics that are at play on a team or in a church. Not every difficult conversation looks the same because not every relationship is the same, right? Sometimes, for instance, you've got someone you're in a relationship with where it's a peer-to-peer. So they're not below you in leadership, they're not above you in leadership. It's peer-to-peer conflict. So that might be, I'm not over them, they're not over me, we're on the same level. So it matters how I show up and what I say when it comes to this situation. So here are some challenges real quickly in peer-to-peer difficult conversations that you need to keep in mind of in peer-to-peer. First of all, remember that power, obviously in that dynamic, power is shared. So perceived tone sometimes can feel like criticism or competition. It can feel like criticism or competition when you're peer-to-peer. Sometimes there can be an innate defensiveness when you're peer-to-peer because they're thinking like, who are you to say something to me about this? Who are you? You're not my leader, things like that, right? So some tips to keep in mind when you're having a peer-to-peer conversation with someone, that's this. Use mutual language. Use mutual language. I want us to have a great relationship. I want us to be on the same page. I want us to be stronger as teammates. Be clear that your goal is an alignment, not authority. Be clear that the goal is us trying to get on the same page. It's not about putting them in their place and you usurping some sort of power thing over them. And then also reinforcing trust and value by saying, hey, I'm so grateful for the gift you are to this team. And to be specific about the gift that they are. Hey, I'm so grateful for the creativity you bring to our team. I don't want to lose that, but I also want to make sure that relationally you and I are okay. So you're affirming the value they bring to the team. Because sometimes when you go to another peer about a difficult topic, they can feel kind of at threat that their value is being questioned. Affirm the value, but also talk about the trust or things that needs to be bridged. Okay. Here's another different type of difficult conversation is would be staff to leader. So if you're in a support role and you're having a difficult conversation with someone above you in leadership, that's a different dynamic, right? So for instance, that might be like you being able to say something like being able to say, I see something maybe you see something that's concerning in how they're leading or how they're addressing, but they're my boss. How do I do this? This is awkward. How do I speak the last 10% without losing credibility in their eyes, where they're going to take opportunities from me, or there might be reprisal in how they deal with me. There could be fear of being misunderstood, or like I said, maybe they take opportunities from you because of the frustration that you've offered them. Here's some tips to keep in mind when you're talking to a leader above you about a difficult topic where you need to have a difficult conversation with them. Here it is. A couple of tips. Begin with honor. Begin with honor. Beginning with honor, it says something like, I appreciate your leadership, and I want to share something that's weighing on me. I appreciate your leadership. I appreciate the gift you are to me, the gift you have been to our church, our missions endeavors, our missions initiative. But there's something that's been weighing on me, and I respect our relationship enough to have the conversation with you. I knew I could come to you, right? Second thing, ask permission. Ask permission. And a lot of times that can sound like this. Would it be okay if I shared a concern that might help our working relationship? Can I share my heart with you? Would it be okay if I shared something with you that I think might help how we work together. So you're, again, asking permission. And almost everybody says, well, yeah, of course. Talk to me, share with me, right? Another tip would be brief. Be brief. One of the biggest mistakes people make in having a difficult conversation is they beat, is this an African term, beat around the bush?
Yeah.
Do people say that? Is there
Yes.
what's the South African version of that, right? Yeah, beat around the bush.
Going around the mountain instead of talking direct.
Yeah, going around the mountain, yeah, exactly. So that's one way we do it. Like, we just don't get to the point. It's like we don't know how to start the conversation, and the person's wondering, like, how long is this Zoom call going to be? I'm exhausted, and we haven't even gotten to the topic yet. So you want to just dive in versus like beating around the bush or going around the mountain. Yeah, gotcha. All right. Here's another style, another different relational dynamic is when you're a leader and you're going to someone that's following you. They're on your team, you lead them, you're your point, you're their direct report, you're in that kind of leader-follower situation, all right? This is some things to keep in mind. First of all, this might be a situation where I lead this person, I care about them. How do I correct them without crushing them? And so here's some challenges. First of all, you've got to recognize that as a leader, there's a power dynamic. That there's a power dynamic at play. You might want to be the most loving shepherd at play, but when there's leader in front of your name or a title in front of your name and they're under your leadership, you have to be honest with yourself that there's a power dynamic. And whether you intend for that to be, that can be intimidating. We as leaders sometimes can take up a lot of oxygen in the room with just our space, our personality, how aggressive we are, how driven we are. We might not even tend to do that, but sometimes we can take up a lot of space in a relationship. We've got to recognize that because that very situation could intimidate or sometimes silence people. We might say, hey, I want you to have an open door policy. I want you to know you can come to me. But sometimes our personality is so large and so big, we've got to know that. That even if our relationship, even if our personality is not that big, sometimes people see themselves under that leadership as smaller. They shouldn't, but sometimes they're naturally intimidated by that. You need to be aware of that as a leader. And sometimes I would also say that as a leader, sometimes there's a temptation to either go too harsh or too soft in a conversation. Most people land on either end. They're too harsh in dropping the hammer as a leader, or sometimes they're too soft. You need to find kind of the medium, the middle way there. So here's some tips for leaders when you're talking to those that you're leading. First of all, lead with relationship. Lead with relationship. Hey, because I care about your growth, I want to be honest with you. Because I believe in you, because I see so much great potential in you, I want to share this with you. You're validating their value, you're calling out the goodness and the fingerprints of God on their life, but you're adding that, but there's something else I want to share with you. You need to be clear. I'm going to get more details about this. You need to be clear about expectations while offering support. Clear about expectations. Don't back off on, sometimes we do one or the other. We drive home with a hammer the expectations, or we only bring support, and we need to be bringing both. Clear expectations and also how we can support them. And then you need to check for understanding and feedback. Does that make sense to you? Is there any other questions you have? Okay. I also want to tell you real quickly, as a leader, it's so important. This is something, this is not in my notes. I'm just kind of giving you something I've found to be helpful the last, for a long time. As a leader, when you have either a painful or a difficult conversation that you know was difficult to have for you, was difficult for them to hear, I would encourage you to check on the person later on. For instance, sometimes it's later that night. Let's say you had the conversation in the morning. Sometimes it's later that night. Sometimes it's the next day. Sometimes it's a couple of days later. Sometimes I might drop a text, hey, just checking on you. How are you since we talked? How are we? You okay? Because sometimes the person might leave having heard you and they're good to go. You think they're good to go, we're fine. But they go home, they're laying in bed, they start ruminating. All of a sudden they kind of spin out, spiral in their own heart and mind, right? You as a leader need to take the proactive opportunity to reach out to them. How are you? Are you okay? How are you doing? The other thing is be very intentional after you've had a difficult conversation like that to, when you see them in the lobby at church, the very next moment, seek them out and go give them a huge hug. Because when someone has been corrected or a difficult conversation is had, they're wondering, how does this affect us now? They might be wounded, they might feel less than, they might think that you're going to see them as less than. You need to be proactively seeking them out, giving them that big, huge hug. Love you, so good to see you today, hey, we're good. They're going to think they're going to be ultimately marked by you for all time. Does that make sense? So it's so crucial that you be seeking them out, making sure that they know, hey, we're good. Just because you're showing them that you could have a difficult conversation and the sun still come up in the relationship. Does that make sense? Yeah.
What if the conversation goes bad?
Yeah, let's talk about that. I'm going to come back, keep that question in your heart, because we're going to do some questions then. Because I'm just like, what if it's nuclear? It's not always roses, right? All right, so real quickly, I want to give you a framework, and if you're taking notes, either a note, I'm going to give you an acronym of how to frame a conversation you're going to have with somebody that might be a difficult one. And the acronym is CPR. It's the very thing for pulmonary resuscitation. CPR, that's not the words, but it's like that, right? CPR, so if you're writing down your notes, CPR, all right? So the first thing that's going to happen when you realize, you go, okay, Nathan, you've convinced me, I need to have a difficult conversation, all right? I want to give you a framework of how you put that conversation together, right? The first letter, that C, stands for content. Content. You have to decide, what am I talking to this person about, all right? Now we walk through each of these, and then I'm going to go back and kind of explain them. All right, so the first one is content. The next word, and you're going to leave some space in between to kind of dialogue about them. So you got content, then you've got, the P stands for pattern, and the R stands for relationship. Content, pattern, relationship. All right? So the first thing that has to happen is you have to decide, what do I need to talk to them about? All right? Have you ever been like frustrated? Somebody's driving you nuts, like, you know, what do I not need to talk to them about? Man, they're just a, dumpster fire, So you've got to think about, you have to determine what you want to talk to them about. Because if you go to a sit down or a difficult conversation and you don't have that processed, that conversation's not going to go well. You're just going to start ranting and rattling off all these situations. It's going to be a fire, right? It's not going to be good. You've got to determine. So you will ask yourself some questions under content. Let me give you a few questions you can ask yourself to help discover what the content you need to confront with them about. First of all is, what happened? What is it specifically that happened? Here's another question. What agreements or expectations were broken? What agreements or expectations were broken by the person? All right, you guys with me? So that'll help you kind of know, what do I need to talk about, all right? Now let's say that the first time you might have a nudging conversation with somebody that might feel slightly difficult for some of you. It might, like just saying something like this might feel like a nuclear war has happened, right? This isn't, I'm just saying the first inclination. For instance, let's say that someone's scheduled to be in kids ministry on a Sunday and they don't show up. They were on the schedule, they had confirmed in PCO they were to be there, and they don't show, okay? So a first content conversation, you might not even be one where you get to pattern relationship. I'll explain that. But let's say the first inclination is just like a hallway conversation the next time you see them, or maybe it's a Wednesday night. Do you guys do midweek ministry here at all? Or okay, I figured that. So let's say the next time you see them, either a week later or a couple of days later, you might see them and you go, hey. And let's say that you want to nudge them or talk to them about why they didn't show up at kids ministry on Sunday. They were scheduled, they were confirmed. Why didn't you show up, right? So let's say this is not a pattern. This is just the first time this has happened, okay? So you need to approach it as if it's the first time it's happened. If you drop a nuclear bomb on them for one time, well, you yourself as a leader have issues, all right? So the first way that I like to approach first-time occurrences when someone's either broken a commitment or expectation or standard is I always check on them. I check on them. From a shepherd standpoint. Meaning, I might say, hey, we missed you last Sunday at Kids Church. I know you were on the schedule to be there. How are you? Is everything okay with you? How are things with your family? I'm checking on them, right? every young leader has made the mistake of sometimes coming in hot into a conversation and just, hey, why weren't you there? We needed you. We were so underwater. Ooh. You know? Leader, when you're young, you do stuff like that, but it's so much better to approach them as a shepherd and to check on them initially. Because what's worse than that is when you go to them and you say, hey, why were you there? You know, we really needed you. You said you were going to be there and you didn't. And they go, I'm sorry, my mom went to the hospital Saturday night. She's on life support.
Yeah.
And you feel as a leader, you're like, you know, I look like an idiot, right? So it's much better to approach the first time occurrence with, how are you? What's going on? How's your family? Are you okay? And most of the time, they're going to go, I'm good. Okay. Okay. Well, I had you on schedule for Sunday ministry. Sounds like you're good. I'm so glad you're okay. Would you communicate with us? Because that's so important for us as a team, right? So that's first occurrence, right? Now let's say that beyond the first occurrence, it starts to become a pattern, right? So that's where it leads an opportunity for us as leaders to now construct maybe a more thorough conversation, all right? We back up and say, it's really important for you as a leader, not every conversation with your team members needs to be a last 10% conversation. If you as a leader, it's always like aggressive, hey, can we sit down and talk? I need to talk to you. It's really important. They're going to be like, what is this person so intense all the time? You got to choose your battles, all right? So you got content, but let's say you start to notice a pattern in a volunteer or a team member or a staff member or whatever. Now I'm going to move through the rest of the increment. So now I've got content. This is what's been broken. This is commitments that are broken, standards that are broken. I've seen a pattern. So now it might look something like this. Hey, you weren't. I wanted to check. Are you good? You know, you're checking on them since they weren't there. How are you? You okay? Hey, listen. We missed you on Sunday again. Now you're going to pattern. This is the second time you've missed kids ministry without communicating with us. It can really put us in a bind. And now you're going to, or let's say that you go to them at the third time, whatever standard you want to set. But then you need to, so you do content, then you go pattern, this is the second, this is the third, this is the fourth, this is the fifth time, X, Y, Z. Now you need to connect it with not just content and pattern, you've got to connect it with relationship. What do I mean by that? How their actions are impacting you as a leader and the team, or the ministry, or the church. Okay? So it's content, call out the pattern that you're seeing in love. Hey, I've got to share with you, this is beginning to affect my ability to trust and lean on you in this area of our ministry. Me trusting you, what you're going to be like in a staff meeting, how you show up. It's starting to impact our connection, and it's starting to impact your credibility on our team. Okay? You've got to be able to line those out in a conversation, because if you just go with content and pattern, but you don't connect it to relationship, they're going to think you're just being nitpicky, that you're being nagging. You need to help connect the dots with them about how it's impacting you as a leader and the team as a whole. You have to connect it with relationship. Okay? It's here. I would say that you need to let them feel the weight of impact. Some of the issues of where discipleship and life change doesn't happen is sometimes we as leaders want to protect people from the correction. Have you ever had a difficult conversation with somebody, and as you talk to them, they start crying about like a situation? You guys know what I'm talking about? Maybe it's been you. Maybe you're the cry. Okay, you've been there, right? All right. Sorry, I didn't mean to put you out. Just so you know. All right, so like I've been in this countless situation countless times where I have to bring gentle correction to somebody, and as I talk to them, they begin to weep and cry because of the correction that I'm bringing. Maybe it's something they've blown up, they've made a huge mistake, whatever the situation is, they've blown it, they know they've blown it, and they begin to cry. All right? And it's here that I want to challenge you to do something counterintuitive, because most of us are shepherds at heart. We really love people, we care about them. And our natural inclination when someone begins to cry is to stop what we're doing. Yeah. Like I've said enough, now you're crying, I guess we're good, okay, I'm sorry, I didn't mean don't cry. And we start trying to rescue them from the correction. It's really important that you don't do that. You've got to allow them to feel the weight of what's happened. Appropriately, all right? Appropriately. Now, if they're crying because you mentioned in the hallway of the coffee shop that they missed one time, it's either an issue with how you're doing what you're doing, or they're feeling pretty fragile, all right? But the main issue that I'm trying to get is make sure you don't protect them or rescue them from the correction. Because sometimes that helps, you're helping them connect the dots. Because what I've seen oftentimes is when you're bringing correction that's needed, they begin to cry. Our natural inclination is to stop and go, well, I guess I've said enough. I don't want to. Our natural, an American phrase we might use, I don't want to pile on. I don't want to make this worse because they're already crying. I probably need to just stop. But oftentimes we need to continue the conversation to bring, hey, you can recognize the tears. I know this is hard to hear. I know this is challenging to hear. But I love you enough to know I need to share a few more things with you. Here are the consequences that are going to happen if you continue down this road on our team. You've got to be able to lay that out. Here are my expectations as we move forward, what I need to begin to see the change if we're going to be able to navigate this well. Don't rescue them from the correction that's needed. You've got to kind of continue on. Hand them tissue, be warm and affirming, acknowledge the tears, but you need to finish the conversation. Don't rescue them from what all you need to say. Can I get an amen in the room?
Amen.
It's really, really important, all right? I would also say that before you get into the conversation, you need to process, what have I been telling myself about this person? What I mean by that is we all tell a story about ourselves, about why. We all attribute motives to why people do what they do, right? We might be telling ourselves, this person doesn't even respect me. They're blowing me off. You might be telling yourself that they're just lazy, or they're not behind the vision, or they're trying to sabotage our team, or they're being disrespectful or dishonoring or whatever. We tell ourselves all kinds of things. But instead of assuming the worst, it's really important that you tell yourself and remind yourself that this person's human, and that they're under construction just like I am. Okay? The other thing is that you need to tell yourself, they may be unaware about how they're coming across. They may be unaware. Another thing, remind yourself that there could be a situation where no one has ever given this person the knowledge of understanding of what they're doing and why it's wrong. Sometimes as a pastor and leader, sometimes I've said things to people that it's the first time anyone's ever said and told them that or taught them that. They just don't know. Okay? They might be carrying some unseen stress that you don't know about. They might be walking through a situation that you don't know about. So remind yourself, you need to master the stories that you're telling yourself when it comes to these conversations with other people. Oftentimes there's a lot more under the surface that you don't know. Be careful of these narratives that you kind of build up in your mind against team members, people that you're loving and serving and leading in the conversation. When you are preparing yourself for a difficult conversation, I would encourage you with a few things. Number one, be prayed up. Be praying. Be praying. Pray through it. The second thing, it's really important that you have processed emotionally, especially for someone that's hurt you or made you angry. Unless there are very few situations where you have to have the difficult conversation right then. And sometimes it demands you're going to have some sort of conversation. But when I realize that I'm really hurt or I'm very angry at a person for what they've done, and being angry is not sinful. It can lead to sin, but you need to allow yourself, you need to recognize if I'm angry, if I'm hurt, I probably need to put some space between where I'm at and when I have that conversation, right? So that means that I need to make sure that I've processed where I'm at as a leader so that I can show up in the best possible spiritual, mentally, and emotionally healthy place as I can when I sit down and talk with them. That I'm not visceral, that I'm not bringing that anger and rage into the room, that I'm not being overly emotional. You can be emotional, but I don't need to be like falling pieces in front of the person. I need to have processed enough so that I can communicate well my thoughts. Does that make sense? Okay. Make sure you processed it well. Then I would encourage you to prepare your thoughts. Prepare your thoughts. One of the biggest mistakes I see leaders make when it comes to difficult conversations where they need to actually have a sit-down conversation with a team member, with someone they lead and love, with a lay leader of the church, is sometimes they think to themselves, it's a little bit of arrogance and naivete in our mind that we think I can just kind of go off the top of my head on this conversation. I really want to encourage you, I do it all the time, make notes and bring the notes with you into the conversation. Okay? Here's one way I do this. I recommend using a visceral, I grabbed this over here, it's not mine, but I grabbed a piece of paper. I make notes on a piece of paper, I usually fold it in half, and it's usually something go along like here. And I have notes, and it's just, when I'm sitting down with somebody, I might have the notes on my lap, just like here. And I tell them, the reason I don't use a phone, nobody likes to be having an intense conversation, somebody looking at their phone. And you might go, well, it's just my notes, they know that, I'll tell them that. I'm just telling you how people work and how they think. Write it down, right? Don't go into it thinking I can just do this off the top of my head, I'm good to go. Write it down, take the time. When you're having a difficult conversation, maybe you've experienced this, there are physiological effects in the body when you're having a difficult conversation with somebody. Anybody know what I'm talking about? That tightness in your stomach, that queasiness, that your palms maybe start to sweat, your heart beats faster, chest tightens up. All that is normal when you're about to have a difficult conversation with somebody. So you need to know that going into it, that when you feel those effects, that's what's going on. Okay? And the reason why it's important to know that is because you might think, I got this, I can just share right off the top, I'm just going to share my heart with them, my mind. But a couple things are at play. When your mind might start to race, they might begin to blame shift, they begin to deflect, they might begin to get defensive, and then you kind of get off track, and then you walk out of the conversation, you only hit 3 of the 6 things you wanted to talk to them about. Having notes in front of you keep you on track of what you need to hit with them. All right? If they do become defensive and blame shift and things like that, or talk about other issues or other people, you can always say, hey, listen, we can talk about that another time, but today I want us to talk about this. This is what we're talking about today. Does all that make sense?